Welcome to the lecture for Module 10. In Module 10, we're going to be covering two really important topics: informal employee discipline and progressive employee discipline. Quick note before we start, those are two major topics this week is, correcting employee behavior. That's really what we're talking about, right? Correcting employee behavior and discipline employees when we cannot correct their behavior. But before we get into those topics in the rest of the module, we're going to use the lecture to prepare ourselves to get into this topic and prepare ourselves to think about actually having to correct someone else's behavior or to actually discipline them for their behavior. And it's not an easy thing to do. So in order to prepare ourselves for that, we're going to use the lecture to talk about how do employees respond when someone in human resources tries to correct their behavior, or even how they respond when a supervisor tries to correct their behavior. Because if we have a better idea how someone's going to respond or react to us, we're going to go into that situation more confident. Now, it's not unusual for someone to be nervous or a little unsure when they have to confront someone about their behavior. It can be uncomfortable even for human resources professionals. So the more we know about how an employee may react to us, the better prepared we're going to be and the more confident we're going to be in that situation. So as a public personnel administrator, you are going to have the task of addressing and correcting the behavior of all different types of employees. And that's going to cause them stress, right? You are guaranteed to create a level of stress for an employee even when you give them the smallest or slightest redirection. So if what you have to do requires formal counseling, discipline, or worse, terminating an employee, their response is going to be dictated by their own ability to manage their stress and their own emotions, right? We're not responsible for how other people behave. Right? You have to conduct yourself calmly and professionally, and you're not responsible if somebody flies off the handle or gets mad when you talk to them. You're not responsible for that. But knowing they may respond in an angry way is going to help you prepare for it. And you need to be aware of how an employee may react before you ever talk to them. It's important to know that as human beings, we have automatic physiological responses to stress that we have no control over, and all human beings have this in common. When we are exposed to a stressful situation, our body reacts to that stressful situation in a number of ways. And some of those ways include our heart rate increases, right? We actually feel our heart beating faster. Our blood pressure goes up. You may start sweating. You may feel nauseous. Some people have a sense of really intense fatigue, like all of a sudden they feel really tired. It's difficult to concentrate, and some people even have a feeling of anxiety or of panic. And all these feelings and responses are caused by an automatic response in our nervous system that we have no control over. So it happens automatically. Our body's redirecting the actual flow of blood in our body to help us respond to what our body is interpreting as a threat to our security, to our safety, or to our well-being, right? In either a minor or major way, we feel threatened, and our body responds to that stress, right? To get us prepared to respond to this very stressful situation. And we often talk about it in terms of what we call fight, flight, or freeze. Flight, flight, or freeze are three common responses to a very stressful situation. So before we talk about the workplace, I want you to imagine that someone with a gun enters your local Stewart store. And there's a bunch of customers in the store shopping when an armed robber enters the store. The first customer sees the robber and runs right out the door, realizes what's happening, and runs. That's flight. The second customer in line physically launches himself on the robber and tries to wrestle the gun away from them. That is a fight response. And The cashier is so frightened by the stress of having a gun pointed at them that he literally just freezes. He just stands there, completely still, doesn't say anything, doesn't do anything, doesn't move. That's freeze. So that's three people responding to the exact same situation in very different ways. The first guy runs, the second guy fights, the third guy freezes. But they're all confronted with the same situation. Three different ways to respond. In the workplace, it's going to look a little different. When someone flights or flees, is a better way to say it, in a stressful work situation, it means they immediately leave or they try to remove themselves from the situation or the conversation. These people will often try to avoid you, delay meetings with you, find excuses not to meet with you, anything to avoid an uncomfortable conversation or any type of constructive criticism, right? So they're trying to remove themselves from the situation. So you may make an appointment to meet with this employee and they're going to cancel it, or they're not going to show up, or they're going to ask to delay it over and over and over again, right? They're avoiding having this conversation or meeting with you. That's a flight response. These people could also just instantly get up and walk out of a meeting, right? So they come to the meeting, you're trying to discuss their behavior with them, and they just get up and they walk out. That's a flight response. A fight response in the workplace hopefully looks much different than the example we used of someone in an armed robbery. These people are likely to become defensive or argumentative. They're not going to listen. They're going to interrupt you. They may even aggressively interrupt you, right? They're going to become defensive and fight back. Now, I'm not talking about physically fighting back. Hopefully that never happens to you ever in the workplace. So I don't mean physically fighting you. I mean they get defensive and maybe even a little aggressive. That's a fight response. And lastly, freeze. This person's just going to get really quiet. They're not going to say much. They might not say anything at all. They might not really respond at all. They may literally have no reaction. All you may get is a nod or an okay, or I understand, right? They're going to hardly respond to you at all. That's a freeze response. So fight, flight, or freeze are just three different ways people can react to the same situation. So we all encounter stress of different levels throughout our lives, and when asked what caused people to feel stress, a common answer is work, right? I get stressed at work. The highest level of stress at work is caused when an employee is informed that he or she's going to be fired, right? That's pretty much the worst thing that can happen to you at your job is you're told that you're terminated. That's as highly stressed as you're going to get. But people also get stressed when they get confronted with their behavior. Do you like being confronted when you do something wrong? Probably not. I don't either, right? That's not our most comfortable thing, is being informed that we didn't do the right thing, we did something wrong, we acted inappropriately. No one likes that, right? None of us enjoys being corrected in our behavior. But people's stress response will vary depending on how serious the consequences could be, getting formally disciplined or fired being the most serious thing that can happen to you at work. But some people react differently, even if it's a minor thing, right? Even if it's something is saying, I noticed that you handed that project in a day late. I really need you to turn projects in on time. Even that can really stress some people out, right? So everyone's different. We're never going to be able to predict perfectly how any particular person's going to respond, right? Everybody acts differently. But flight, fight, and freeze is very common. This is just a portion of what's called the Holmes-Ray Social Readjustment Rating Scale, or in short, what we just refer to as a stress scale. And there's all different types of stress scales out there. In 1967, two psychiatrists, Thomas Holmes and Richard Ray, developed the Social Readjustment Rating Scale. And what the scale does is it lists 43 things that can happen to you in your life. And each one of those things is assigned a number of points. So according to the scale, the most stressful thing that could happen to any of us would be the death of our spouse or of our child. That's easily obvious. I don't think anyone argued that's the most stressful thing that can happen to a human being. And that life event is assigned 100 points. That is a very stressful situation. The lowest number on the scale, which doesn't appear here, but just trust me, the lowest number on the scale is like a minor legal violation, like getting a traffic or a speeding ticket. And that gives you 10 points, right? So the scale gives you life events, and basing on the level of stress it causes, it assigns you a number of points. So at any given time in your life, you can look at this scale, you can see how many of those events you're currently experiencing, and it will give you a score. And it will tell you how much stress you're under, mild, moderate, or severe. And of course, there's plenty of research out there that shows the level of stress we're under has dramatic impacts on our lives, both on our mental health and our physical health. So using the Holmes Race Scale or a different type of stress scale can give you an objective way to look at how stressed you are at any given time of your life. So when we're looking at, and I just put, a couple of items from the scale, there's 43 total for this one, but there's 16 listed here. And we can see that number 8 is getting fired from your job. Now, some of the things on here are positive things, right? Like number 7 is getting married, and most of us would think that that's a positive thing, right? Number 12 is getting pregnant. Number 14 is having a birth of a child. A lot of these things we think of as being very positive things. But positive things are stressful too, right? If you've ever planned a wedding, that can be very stressful. Having a child may be the happiest thing that ever happens to you. It's also super hard and super stressful, right? So some of these events are what we would classify as negative and some positive, but they're all stressful. And number 8 is getting terminated from your job. So if you think about all the things that can happen in your life, that number 8 would be fired from your job, shows that that's an incredibly stressful thing for someone to experience. Number 10 surprises some people, is retirement. Well, why would retirement be stressful? You think, God, that'd be great. I don't have to work anymore. But remember, some positive changes are extremely stressful. And if you've been in the workforce every day for 25, 30, 35, 40 or more years, retirement is a huge life change and can be very stressful for some people. And retirement's also something you deal with as a personnel administrator, right? You're going to be helping through the retirement process. So it's good for you to know that can be really stressful for people. Number 15 is changes at work. Could be a minor change, could be a major change. Changes at work are stressful. We spend a lot of time at our jobs, right? So any change that happens in job is going to impact us. Number 16 is financial problems. I don't think any of us would disagree that financial problems are stressful. And financial problems are often directly connected to work, right? Whether you don't have a job, whether you're not earning enough at your job, whether how much you're being paid changes, right? That can be very stressful. Number 30 on the scale is having trouble with a supervisor at work. Number 31 is changes in work hours or conditions. When we think about the COVID pandemic, you can imagine if you yourself were working during the COVID pandemic, how stressful it was, how many changes that created for the workforce, being sent out of the work, and you can only work on certain days, and you're in the office and you're out of the office, and having to wear a mask, and having to be, seated certain distance from people, and not being able to have in-person meetings, and that created huge havoc in all of our workplaces. So even a minor change in work hours or conditions is stressful. So what's the point of this? Really important for us to remember, changes at work are huge changes in our lives. And if they're negative changes at work, it can be very stressful. Even positive changes at work can be stressful. It's great to get promoted, right? We all want to get a promotion, but getting promoted can be stressful, taking on more responsibility, more people's behavior that you're responsible and accountable for, having more projects, more deadlines. That can be stressful, right? It's a positive thing, but it can be stressful. So just something that's really helpful to be aware of. And I encourage you to find this stress scale online or a different one. There's plenty of them out there. And just assess your own stress level over what's been going on in your life in the past year. Really helpful tool. So Dr. Susan Whitbourne is a PhD. She's a psychologist, and many psychologists and psychiatrists and mental health professionals have written articles and done research on defense mechanisms. But this was one article I particularly liked because she really made it very simple and straightforward to understand what a defense mechanism is and why it matters. So by definition, a defense mechanism is a mental process used to avoid conflict, anxiety, or an uncomfortable situation. It's a mental process. It's a reaction that we exhibit in order to avoid conflict, anxiety, or uncomfortable situations. And her article was published in 2011 in Psychology Today. And she actually identified 9 common defense mechanisms, and they're all important and they're all worth reading about. But we're going to focus on 4, okay? 4 that are very common in the workplace. So how do people respond to stress by using a defense mechanism? Well, here's 4. Denial, projection, rationalization, it's hard to say during a lecture, rationalization, and regression. We're going to look at each one of those individually. The first is denial. We all know what denial is, right? You talk to somebody about something that's objectively true or real, and they say, nope, that's not true. Nope, that didn't happen. Regardless of how silly it seems to respond that way, that's their defense. Refuses to accept the truth or reality of a situation. They will even deny a very obvious fact. They are not good listeners when they're in this mode. They are not going to listen to you. They can be very defensive. They often ignore concerns of their supervisor, of their coworkers, and generally will not accept responsibility for their behavior. So those are pretty obvious examples, right? So let's say you're coming into work and you observe an employee who should have been at work an hour ago and they're arriving an hour late. And you say to that employee, oh, I noticed you're an hour late this morning. No, I'm not. I'm not late. And you're like, yeah, you are, right? I know what time you're supposed to be here. You're an hour late. No, I'm not. I wasn't late. Or you see someone coming back late from lunch, right? And you're like, oh, I think you're late coming back from lunch. I'm not late. Right? Did you get that project done? Yep, it's done. Okay, do you have it? Yeah, I'll have it to you in just a minute. And you know it's not done, right? Or they would have handed it to you, right? So it's just that kind of knee-jerk reaction, like they're almost responding to you before they think about it, right? So you know something is obvious and objectively true. It's a factual thing, and yet they're denying it, okay? That's denial. Second one we're going to talk about is projection. Projection is when we put our thoughts, our feelings onto someone else. So they often say things like, well, I don't feel that way, but they do. It's another way of not taking responsibility for your own actions or behavior. And you're trying to actually deflect attention onto other people. So let's think of an example. So your employee, Ted, has been making unwanted and inappropriate sexual comments to Marie, who's one of his coworkers. And when you try to discuss the matter with Ted, he says, I'm not the one making sexual comments. I never make sexual jokes. She's the one who's always flirting with me. It's her. It's not me. It's her. And yet you've never heard Marie say or do anything inappropriate towards Ted, but you've witnessed Ted saying and doing inappropriate things toward Marie, right? So he's blaming his behavior and saying, it's not me, it's her, right? It's her. She's the one doing the wrong thing, not me. Another example is you have Joanne. Remember when we talked about chronic complainers last module, right? Joanne's that person who sits in the cubes all day. This is terrible. My job stinks. And I hate it here. Nothing ever goes right. Nothing good ever happens to me here. I never get anything, right? She's the big downer at the office. And you have her coworkers are coming to you and going, I just can't take this. It's uncomfortable. She's bringing down morale. She's just a big downer to everybody. And when you talk to her, she says, oh, no, I'm fine. I don't have any complaints. But everyone else is always complaining. And you're thinking to yourself, I didn't hear everyone else complaining. I actually heard her complaining. Makes you feel a little crazy, right? So she's trying to take her feelings and her emotions and assign them to other people. That's projection. Then we have rationalization. not to be flippant, but these are just really lame excuses for your own behavior or actions, right? I only did it because they, right? There's always a reason. There's always a because, but it's always a lame reason, right? Won't take responsibility, frequently blames other people for their behavior. And these are the folks who always point out another person as being worse than them, right? So they won't say, well, I did the right thing. They'll say, he did a worse thing, right? So they're trying to get you to pay attention to that other person over there. So, for example, you ask Rick why his projects are always submitted past the due date. And he says, yeah, I know sometimes my projects are late. But do you know why? Do you know why my projects aren't late? Because my supervisor hates me. And she never includes me in meetings. And she never tells me anything. And she never answers my questions. And that's why my projects are always late. So in that, did Rick take responsibility for turning work in late? No, right? It's because of his supervisor, right? So he's trying to deflect your attention onto his supervisor and say, really, it's my supervisor's fault. I miss my deadlines. It's not my fault. I miss my deadlines. It's my supervisor's fault, right? Trying to find a lame excuse for their own behavior. Another example of that would be Maria's been hanging out in the lunchroom and she's socializing during the day when she's supposed to be at her desk performing her duties. And her supervisors talked to her about it a couple of times, but she just keeps doing it. She's just in that lunchroom all the time, talking and chatting about all kinds of social stuff. So you're asked to meet with Maria and tell her she's not allowed to spend unnecessary time in the lunchroom. She's only allowed to be in the lunchroom if she's just grabbing a quick snack or drink, or if she's actually on her lunchtime and she's having her lunchtime in the room. And when you meet with her, you say, you can only be in the lunchroom during your lunchtime or if you're just quickly grabbing a drink or snack. And she says, well, I may spend a lot of time in the lunchroom, but I only do it because everyone else leaves work early. I don't leave for work early. I may spend a few minutes extra in the lunchroom, but I don't leave work early like everyone else does, right? So she's doing the same thing as the other guy. She's trying to take your attention and get you to look at what other people are doing and not look at what she's doing, right? So if you listen for the word because, this sometimes comes up in rationalization. Well, I did that, but because they did that. Or I only did it because they do it, right? We often make this excuse when we're trying to diet and lose weight or adopt a new workout behavior, right? And you say, well, I can't stop eating donuts because people keep bringing them to work. Right? Well, that's really not the reason. We eat donuts because we want to eat donuts, right? It's not other people's fault for bringing donuts to work, right? So those are examples of rationalization. And our last one is regression. And this is a silly photo, but it really kind of will help you remember what this is. Regression is a very childlike or childish response to an adult situation. And yes, this can even resort sometimes in the workplace to name calling, pouting. When people are using a regression as a defense mechanism, they often say things like, that's not fair, right? We were all little kids once, and things often feel unfair when we're little, and usually they are unfair when we're little, right? And if you take something away from a child, or you say you can't do that until after dinner, or I'm taking that toy away from you because you're not using it right? That's not fair, right? Kids get real upset. Kids are also unable to manage their emotions. They often refuse to communicate, right? So you're trying to talk to a little kid and explain their behavior and that you're trying to help them, and they just won't talk to you, right? Or they close their eyes, or they put their hands over their ears and go, no, 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 I'm not listening to you, right? Those are all very childlike behaviors, and it's okay to act that way when you're a child. You're learning your limits, you're learning the rules, and that's okay. But it's really not okay to behave this way as an adult when someone needs to talk to you about your behavior. But don't be surprised, and if you've been in the workforce for any length of time, you've seen some pretty wild examples of this. So I want you to imagine you're in an office space. Space is really at a minimum. There's really no room. It's very overcrowded. And people are told that no one's getting their own office anymore. We're going to have to share offices. And when Karen's told she's going to have to share her office with a coworker, she yells, "That's not fair!" And she starts to cry. Okay? That's a very childlike response to a very minor work issue, right? We all have to share space. We all work in the public sector. That's how it goes. None of us are working in castles, right? So we all have tight spaces. They're not always the most pleasant or fanciest work environments, right? That's the way it goes. That's public service. Being told you have to share space with someone, really not that big of a deal. It does not warrant someone having a meltdown. You can imagine a supervisor has a coaching session with Mark. We're going to talk about coaching sessions in other parts of the module this week. And a supervisor's had a coaching session with Mark, and she says, okay, so is there anything else, do you want to say anything about what we talked about today, or do you have any feedback for me? And Mark pushes back his chair and he stomps out of the office and he refuses to talk to anybody for the whole rest of the day, right? He's not talking to anyone. I'm just going to sit at my desk and refuse to talk to everyone because I didn't want to hear about my behavior. That's a very childlike response to correction. And lastly, you can imagine that you're in your human resources offices and you have to talk to John about his behavior. So you very professionally say, John, I'd like to meet with you at 2 o'clock in my office. Please stop by. He comes in your office, he plops down on the chair and he instantly throws his arms up and crosses his arms across his chest. And before you can even say anything, John goes, everybody's always picking on me. Nobody here likes me. Now, that would be a very common thing to hear on a child's playground during the school day, not really appropriate in an adult professional environment, right? So that's regression, slamming doors, pouting. I actually saw someone at work stomp their foot once. I'm not joking, right? They wanted to be a part of a project. They were told that they couldn't be. They actually stomped their foot and walked out of the room, right? Really hard not to laugh. Don't laugh when that happens. You can laugh later on when no one's around. It's silly sometimes, right? You're actually embarrassed for people when they act this way. So those are our 4 defense mechanisms that often come up at work. Remember, there's others. Our psychologist who wrote the article identified 9. Other people have identified more, but we just really focused on those 4: denial, projection, rationalization, and regression. Remember, knowledge as to how people respond to stressful situations is going to make you a better human resources professional. It's going to allow you to prepare yourself for how someone may act when you have to confront them about their behavior or about their conduct. And it's going to help you plan how you're going to respond. You, as the human resources professional, must always remain calm and professional no matter what the other person does. It may be upsetting to you. You may feel mad or embarrassed or anxious. You're going to have to stifle that. You're going to have to remain calm and professional. Later on, when you're with your own supervisor and with your coworkers, you can kind of debrief and de-stress from it. But in that environment, when you're talking with that coworker, you must remain calm and professional. And you being calm and professional is really going to encourage them to be calm and professional. Doesn't always work, right? Hence my coworker who stomped their foot and stomped out of a room. Everyone else was being calm and professional, but it helps, right? You being anxious and heightened and, and like kind of stressed and worried, that's not going to help, right? So we need you to lead by being calm and professional. So let's say you're confronting an employee about their behavior and they start acting like a child. And they're basically having a tantrum. It is not, I repeat, not helpful for you to say, oh, Emily, you're using regression as a defense mechanism right now. That's not helpful, right? You are not helping anyone by saying that. It's helpful for you to know it, right? Because you'll be saying in your mind, oh, Emily's acting like a child because this is a defense mechanism. She's uncomfortable. She's anxious. She does not want to be having this conversation with me. And when she's in an uncomfortable situation, this is what she does. That's helpful to you. But you identifying and labeling it to Emily is not going to be helpful, right? Likewise, the importance of knowing about flight, fight, freeze, and other types of defense mechanisms, that's for your own knowledge, right? That's for your preparation to feel prepared, to help you feel confident. So when someone responds that way, your brain is going to go, yep, I know that's how some people respond when they're in a stressful situation. I'm going to note that. I'm going to remain calm, and I'm going to remain professional. Okay. Learning other theories, not just what we talked about today, but learning other theories about how people respond to stress is going to help you prepare for how to confront people about their conduct in the workplace. Knowledge of how a person responds to stress will help you prepare yourself for an emotional response so you're going to be able to remain calm and objective. They're not going to catch you by surprise when they stomp their foot, when they get defensive, when they start blaming other people. You're going to be saying in your head, yep, that's how some people respond to stress. I understand why they're doing that. I'm just going to keep, addressing this the best way I can, give them an opportunity to speak, and I'm just going to keep going. Number 2, it's going to help you plan how you're going to respond if they display unprofessional behavior. Okay. So if you have a sense that, that guy, I've heard him kind of get mad when people talk about him. He can be very confrontational. You knowing that ahead of time is going to help you remain calm. You're going to say, I got to confront this guy with his behavior. I know the last time someone had to talk to him, he got really defensive and even a little angry. So don't be surprised when that happens, self. That may happen. And how am I going to respond when he does that? Okay. Just helps you be prepared. 3, it also helps you not take their response personally. Remember, we talked about the stress scale. People don't respond well when they're under a lot of stress. Nobody does. That's not our best self, right? If we're being criticized, if we're being corrected, it's stressful. Who knows we never know what's going on in other people's lives, right? People may be dealing with other very stressful situations. They may be getting married. They may be getting divorced. They may be considering retirement. They may be having huge changes in their marriage or their life or the life of their children that we don't know anything about. So we don't know what other stresses other people are experiencing. So don't take it personally. Try really hard to not internalize someone getting angry or defensive, because it's really not about you, right? They're responding to a situation. You just need to remain respectful, calm, and professional. So when people respond to you in an angry, childish, or blaming manner, just remember that's how they handle stress when they're confronted with their own behavior, right? When an employee responds to even a minor correction or suggestion and they give you this big, overly dramatic response, what they really may be doing is trying to get you to stop talking, right? It's almost manipulative. If you ever had a friend or somebody in your life that you'd be like, I really got to talk to them because they did something that hurt my feelings, or they really ticked me off last week and I got to be an adult and talk to them about it. But you're like, if I do that, she's going to throw a fit, or she's going to cry, or he's going to get mad. And I'm just dreading having to have this conversation. It's actually a way people manipulate us into not having those conversations, right? So we have to know that an employee who's very dramatic or very defensive might actually be hoping you go, never mind, and you walk away. And of course, as a human resources professional, you can't do that. Lastly, remember, it sounds kind of trite or silly, but be a good example. It really is important. Handle yourself professionally at all times. Don't take anyone else's response to you personally. And remember, all of us have supervisors and bosses too. So our supervisors, our bosses, our leaders are also going to be coming to us about our own behavior. And they may have some constructive criticism for us about how we can do things better, more efficiently, or more effectively. And when this occurs, we have to remember we need to accept responsibility, respond calmly, and discuss ways we can improve. Right? Really, that's the best response. So be a good example of that. When someone has to confront you about a missed deadline or that you were running late for work, accept responsibility, remain calm, and discuss how you can improve. Because other people are watching you. And as a human resources professional, you really are an example for how you want other people to behave. And we don't want to be hypocrites, right? We don't want to be acting like a crazy person at work and then demanding professional behavior from other people, right? We really want to set the example and we want to set the tone. So that's the end of our lecture. You're going to move on to the other module items, and we're going to be spending all the rest of our time on informal correction of employees and progressive discipline. Please let me know if you have any questions.